There are moments in life that seem too small to notice at first, too mundane to hold any meaning. A dinner invitation, a familiar face at the table, the routine clatter of cutlery against porcelain. But sometimes it's exactly in these ordinary scenes where the fault lines begin to form. Quiet, steady, patient. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of evening where everything in the house felt settled, predictable. The garden outside was perfectly trimmed. The wine on the table was the one my husband always picked. Dry, smooth, reliable. Like him. Our son was away for the semester, and the silence left by his absence had long become part of the background noise. The guest at our table that night wasn't a stranger. Quite the opposite. He had been in our house hundreds of times before. The best friend of our son, almost family. The boy who once ran barefoot through our kitchen asking for more lemonade. Only et wasn't a boy anymore. I noticed it before I even fully registered it. The way he stood now, broader, taller, with the kind of calm that comes with growing up a little. Leaving home, stumbling, learning, and returning with a different kind of presence. His hair was darker than I remembered, his jaw more defined. And when he smiled, there was something thoughtful in it, something aware. My husband, as always, was engrossed in conversation, talking about work, about market changes, about plans for the upcoming week. His words filled the room, but my mind drifted elsewhere. It drifted to the way the guests' eyes followed me as I moved around the table, pouring wine, clearing plates, laughing at my husband's jokes. Not too obvious, never obvious, but there. When the meal was over, my husband insisted that his guests stay the night. "It's late and there's no point driving back at this hour," he said, the generous host, the considerate friend. The young man nodded, flashing that same polite smile, and agreed. Of course he agreed. I caught his gaze just once across the living room as my husband disappeared into the kitchen to fetch more drinks. The glance was brief, but something in it stayed with me, a quiet confidence. I turned away first. I had to. The night settled. My husband fell asleep early, as he often did after wine and long conversation. I stayed downstairs, restless, telling myself it was just the caffeine from the coffee I shouldn't have had after dinner. I read the same page of my book 3 times, unable to focus. I heard the soft creak of the floorboards before I saw him. Barefoot, shirt slightly unbuttoned, he moved through the dim light of the hallway and into the kitchen. He didn't look surprised to find me there. If anything, he seemed quietly amused. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, reaching for a bottle of water from the counter. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I closed my book slowly, setting it down beside me. His eyes stayed on me as he twisted the cap off the bottle, taking a long sip. His movements were calm, unhurried, and I found myself watching, more closely than I expected to. "Late night walks through the kitchen," he said, leaning back against the counter. "Common habit in this house?" I felt my lips part, as if to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress, a small nervous gesture I hadn't made in years. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. The space between us already felt heavier than usual. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the quiet rhythm of my husband's steady breathing upstairs. I wondered, just for a moment, if anyone else could feel what I felt. The silence stretched. Not awkward, intentional. He was watching, waiting, but for what exactly, I wasn't sure. I cleared my throat, steadying my voice. "You should get some rest," I said, turning toward the stairs. But even as I climbed them, each step slow and deliberate, I felt his gaze behind me, heavy, aware, and somewhere inside, beneath the calm I told myself to hold on to, there was something else entirely, a feeling I hadn't expected. Not quite guilt, not yet. I slipped into bed beside my husband, careful not to wake him. His breathing was deep and even, peaceful. My body lay still, but my mind wasn't. It wasn't the caffeine that kept me awake that night. It wasn't the book or the wine. It was the memory of a glance, the weight of a quiet moment. The way one look had stirred something I thought I had long since let go. I closed my eyes and told myself it was nothing, but even then, I wasn't convinced. I've always believed that the worst mistakes aren't the impulsive ones, not the accidents that happen in a rush of emotion. The worst are the ones we walk into slowly, fully aware. Every step took through. Every excuse already rehearsed in the back of our minds. The next morning, the house felt unusually still. My husband had left early, a last-minute meeting he'd mentioned as he drifted off to sleep. I heard the front door close softly while I was still in bed. My body turned toward the window, eyes open, staring at nothing. I stayed under the covers longer than I should have, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of the morning pressing in around me. When I finally went downstairs, he was there. The guest who had always been just a part of the background, my son's oldest friend. He stood near the edge of the porch, one hand resting lazily on the wooden rail, the other holding a cup of coffee. His back was to me at first, shirt draped over the chair beside him, sunlight catching on his skin. There was a calmness in the way he stood, unhurried, at ease. Still here, still part of this morning. I paused at the doorway, watching for a moment longer than I meant to. His frame had filled out with time, stronger now, but without needing to show it. His hair still damp from the shower, and something about the relaxed way he stood felt unexpectedly personal in the quiet of the day. I almost turned back, almost convinced myself to wait until he left, but instead, I stepped outside. He turned at the sound, eyes meeting mine with that same calm, measured look. "Morning," he said. I gave a small nod, keeping my expression even, but the air between us wasn't light. It carried something heavier, something unspoken. We started talking, weather, the quiet neighborhood, ordinary things. But it didn't stay ordinary for long. There was something in the way he looked at me, unrushed, intentional, like he was waiting for me to say what I hadn't said. "You always dress like this to water the plants?" His tone was casual, playful. I glanced down at the dress I'd thrown on, light blue, soft fabric, thin straps, comfortable, summery. I shrugged. "It's warm today," but we both knew that wasn't really the point. He didn't press, just smiled again, leaning back, letting the silence say what the words didn't. There was a quiet control in how he held that space. It made everything feel more intense because nothing was said aloud. I told myself to walk away, to end whatever this was, before it became something harder to ignore. But I didn't move. I stood there, hands lightly clasped, feeling the warmth of the sun, and something else entirely. When I finally turned toward the house, I wasn't fast. He was already moving. Before I reached the door, he was there, not rushing but sure. His hand touched my wrist, light but steady, stopping me gently. I looked at him, too close now, and yet somehow still holding back. His eyes met mine with that same quiet search, not demanding, just waiting. "This isn't something you regret, is it?" His voice was calm, measured. I should have said yes. I should have stepped away, but I didn't. I stood there, letting silence speak what I couldn't bring myself to say. His fingers moved from my wrist to my hand, slow, deliberate, tracing the lines of my palm. I felt a quiet shiver rise up my arm, goosebumps lifting on my skin despite the morning warmth. The moment, when it came, wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. His lips brushed mine softly at first, hesitant, testing. And when I didn't step away, when I leaned in instead of retreating, it deepened. One hand moved gently to my side, pulling me in with a calm certainty that made my pulse quicken. I responded, not out of confusion, but choice. Il est maille en reste against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath at them, a mirror of my own. When we finally parted, it wasn't abrupt. He lingered, forehead resting lightly against mine, breath warm between us. No one said anything. There were no apologies, no nervous laughter to smooth over what had just happened, only the quiet understanding of two people who had stepped over a line that couldn't be erased.
I pulled away first.
Hands dropping, body still sensitive to every point of contact. I didn't look back as I walked inside, but I felt his gaze behind me, and I knew with a certainty that left no room for doubt, this wouldn't be the last time. There's a particular kind of silence that comes after a choice you can't undo. It's not loud, like guilt often is. It's quiet, heavy, like fog settling over the sharp edges of consequence, just enough to clear a path for something more dangerous, the craving to let it happen again. The days that followed weren't awkward. There were no avoided glances or clumsy efforts to undo what had happened. If anything, our next interactions held a strange calm, like we were both too aware to pretend. We spoke of the garden, of plans for the house, of the weather. But beneath those ordinary words was a truth that couldn't. It was in the way he paused just a little too long when I entered the room, the way his eyes lingered before they met mine. It was in how I chose my clothes each morning, fabrics that felt softer against my skin, styles that followed lines I hadn't paid attention to before. I became hyper-aware of myself, my hands, my voice, even the curve of my mouth when I spoke. It was both exhausting and electrifying. My husband, steady and trusting, continued his routines without question.
Morning with coffee and acquis sans chic.
Evenings with the news, shared errands, and soft check-ins. He never asked why I stood longer at the mirror, never noticed how many times I changed before stepping outside. Then came the Thursday. He invited him over again, plans to watch a game, some playoff I never cared about. I could have stayed upstairs, buried myself in a book, but I didn't. I stayed in the kitchen, moving slow, wiping a counter that didn't need cleaning, pretending not to notice how the air shifted every time I crossed into their line of sight. I felt his gaze more than I saw it, trailing from where my blouse met my collarbone and back up. The game droned on, voices rising and falling in the background. My husband was relaxed, laughing, caught up in the screen. Their easy banter filled the room, two people with history comfort. I stayed just close enough to hear, just close enough to feel the weight of the silence between words. Then the moment shifted. My husband left the room to take a call, and in that breath of absence, the quiet changed. I heard the scrape of a chair, the soft sound of footsteps behind me, but I didn't turn. His voice found me, low and sure. You're doing this on purpose. I kept my hands busy, folding a towel that didn't need folding. Doing what? He didn't answer, didn't need to. The air was thick with what hadn't been said. Then, the sound of footsteps returning. The moment snapped, but not. The echo of it lingered, like a sentence half finished. The next few visits followed a quiet rhythm. Polite invitations from my husband, small gatherings, moments that gave us presence without suspicion, and tension that neither of us tried to name. And each time, the space between us felt closer, the pull stronger. I started to find small excuses to be near him, refilling snack bowls, offering another drink, laughing too loudly at jokes that didn't really deserve it. Every glance across the room had intent. Every accidental touch, a hand brushing a shoulder, felt carefully timed. And each time, he met me there, steady, still, never the one to look away first. But it was the quiet things that stayed with me most. The way his knee would press gently against mine under the table. The way his fingers would graze my wrist when handing me something. The pause that followed each of those moments. Long enough to notice, short enough to ignore. It all built towards something unspoken. One evening after dinner, my husband stepped into the garage, leaving the two of us alone to clear the table. I gathered the plates slowly, stacking them into neat piles, keeping my hands moving so they wouldn't shake. He reached across me to take a dish, and our hands touched. He didn't pull away. His fingers stayed resting lightly against mine, his thumb brushing once over the back of my hand. "You know what this is," he said, voice low, steady. I felt the breath catch in my throat. My hands tightened on the plate, knuckles pale. I turned toward him. There wasn't much space between us, just the narrow stretch between counter and table. My voice came quieter than I expected, but it didn't falter. "And you're not going to stop it, are you?" He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time, I saw it. The strain behind his calm expression, that quiet inner tug-of-war between knowing better and wanting more. "I'm not sure either of us wants to," and we stood there, not moving, not speaking, close enough to feel everything we weren't saying, until the sound of my husband returning from the garage broke through. The noise of tools, the door swinging shut, his voice calling out like nothing had changed. But it had, and we both knew it. We were already too far gone. There's a strange kind of ache in sharing a space with someone you can't let yourself want. The more you try to stay composed, the more your body betrays you, in ways no one else sees. The sudden stillness in your posture when they enter.
The way your breath shortens when they stand too close.
The flicker in your eyes that lands on them before you even realize it. The picnic was my husband's idea. A short weekend trip out of town. Just the three of us. No holiday, no real reason.
Just something simple.
Something innocent. At least, that's what it was meant to be. I agreed too quickly, too easily, and I regretted it the second the words left my mouth. But I couldn't lie to myself. I wanted to go. I wanted that quiet tension again, that unbearable closeness without the permission to act on it. The morning of the trip, I stood in front of the mirror a little longer than usual. My dress was light, soft cotton that moved with me, subtle but carefully chosen. Even the details underneath, delicate pale-tone fabric I wore not for anyone to see, but because I needed to feel it, to remind myself of something I wasn't allowed to say out loud. We packed the car with ease, baskets, blankets, folding chairs, the familiar rhythm of a couple who'd done this 100 times. He arrived on time, smiling, helping my husband load the cooler. They laughed and joked, slipping easily into their usual rhythm. But when he caught my eye over the car roof, his gaze stayed a beat longer than it should have. We took our places. My husband drove, always the one to take the wheel. I sat in the back, like I